Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money, millennials, and the young at heart. Welcome, world, to yet another episode of Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where you are joined here by myself, Ben Carter, and my wonderful co-host, Mr. Malcolm Ethridge, licensed financial advisor and friend of mine. Sir, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm, just ready for the weekend.
Okay, ready for the
weekend.
weekend.
Have you been to any XFL games yet?
Not yet, man.
I know you like that stadium
Audi
down
Field.
there, so I figured you may have actually.
Not
It's on my
not
list.
yet.
Like, they only have 8 games or 10 games or something.
I mean, earlier in the season, you were saying you weren't sold on it, but now you want to go to a game.
Well, now, so I'm sold by the folks who say you have to go experience it in person, and it's much better than it is on TV.
Really?
Kind of like soccer at the same stadium. So I said, I have $18 for a ticket to satisfy my curiosity. I'll take your word for it.
It might actually just be the stadium itself, because the soccer stadium we have here in Washington, D.C., Audi Field, is just very intimate and cool.
Okay.
And has a very different feel than most stadiums we are accustomed to.
That's true.
So it just has a very different, close feel than most places. I have some news of mine on the family side. Mm-hmm. The triplets are now officially 1.5 years old.
Okay.
Which is amazing.
You don't say 18 months.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's the appropriate way to say it.
Oh,
right?
I'm actually pleasantly surprised. I should have said it differently. I'm pleasantly surprised that you didn't record that in months or days or weeks.
My note says 1.5 years, so that must be the natural thing.
Maybe that's a dad thing.
Yeah.
Because I bet if I asked your wife, she would have said 18 and a half months.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. That's definitely a thing. And it's 1.5 years old. And can you believe this, folks? Malcolm still hasn't met my kids.
Here you go.
What? Malcolm still ain't met my kids. What kind of co-host?
Do you take them to brunch? Because that's where I am on the weekends. That's where you can find me.
What kind of friend is this? This man ain't met my kids in 1.5 years. We gotta have you and the wife over.
When they're old enough to drink bottomless mimosas, we can hang out. That's
woo, Lord.
my pastime.
That was hilarious. Well, very good. Malcolm will meet my kids when they graduate from high school, I see.
I'll send them a little something.
Very good. Well, as we do on every show, it is now time for headlines. CFOs adapt to workers negotiating for higher pay. This was a February 2020 piece on the Wall Street Journal by Mark Maurer. Finance chiefs are shelling out more than they expected in wages as job candidates press for higher salaries amid a tight labor market. 54% of U.S. employees and managers said they tried to negotiate for higher pay with their last employment offer. A survey released this week by staffing firm Robert Half International said that is slightly down from 55% last year, but up from 39% in 2018, according to the study, which surveyed 2,800 employees and 2,800 senior managers. So a question for you, Malcolm. Have you heard of any stories around people pressing for higher levels of compensation when offered new jobs?
Yeah, I think, we have conversation all the time about salary transparency and that sort of thing, and how women historically are less likely than men to try and negotiate for higher pay and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. All those conversations, as they've been written up in all the different magazines over the last 5 years, let's say, have led to people having those conversations in a meaningful way. Yeah. Couple that with the fact that we're at the lowest unemployment we've seen in before our lifetime.
Right.
It's the perfect storm for people to be saying, I'm willing to come check out your little company, but you have to make it worth my while for me to even come in for the interview.
Right.
Which is something that just historically just has not happened at the same levels.
The balance of power is never flipped in that way, or not often. Well, the article goes on to say that chief financial officers are learning it can take a long time to fill the job with a candidate with the right experience at the right cost, and in many cases ends up increasing the compensation they initially offered, said a person quoted for the story. The person said he expects the proportion of job candidates asking for higher pay to rise as they leverage the continuing strength of the U.S. job market. The unemployment rate was 3.6% in January, a near 50-year low. Now, this is not taking into account like the recent happenings with the coronavirus and what long-term effects that might have. But according to a survey of a company executives released in December by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the availability of skilled personnel was the biggest challenge facing companies in the fourth quarter of 2019, marking the 10th straight quarter executives reported that as their top concern, Malcolm. So how might it be challenging for an employer to find the right talent at the right price when there's more compensation for experienced talent?
Well, I mean, for a lot of folks, the money is the main motivation for leaving one job and going to the next.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where that whole supply and demand, curve happening, you've got to offer enough in compensation
to get me to
be willing to move, because everybody else is willing to offer me more money too.
Right.
So you've got to now offer enough more money that it's more than the more that the person next door is willing to offer me too.
Look at
because
you,
because otherwise I can get the same thing where I am, frankly, if I just talk to HR and say, I'm considering going and interviewing at X.
Right. It
may or may not work out for you, but you're more likely to do that knowing that you've got in your back pocket the other two places that are calling you too.
Indeed. And then I wonder, how could job seekers leverage the lack of available talent in negotiating their salary? So you typically don't know who else is interviewing for a job, but I guess on some levels and in some spaces you can sense like there's a certain level of desperation or need to fill a position. How can people, if they sense that, use that to their advantage in terms of negotiating what they're going to be paid if they're offered the job?
Well, you can kind of tell based on how quickly the hiring manager is moving things along in the process, right? Like they tend to stall and we'll figure it out and whatever. And that's usually just a tactic to see who else applies for the job while they're in the process of doing that hiring.
Right.
Because, it's kind of like, the online dating effect where folks won't necessarily delete the app even though they met somebody they're kind of interested in.
Right.
Because it's like, well, what if somebody else comes along?
See what else fishes out here.
But if all of a sudden the profiles start disappearing on that platform, you're a little more likely to go ahead and go on that second date with the person you met that you're like, there might be something here.
Right.
So I think it's the exact same thing.
Well, excellent. And how does this scenario bolster the prospects of like job seekers in general?
I think it's a great time to be looking for a job. It's also a great time to be having conversation with the powers that be internally, if you like where you are, about whether you're paid appropriately or not. And if it's a conversation where the money isn't necessarily there and that they don't have the money to pay you more in salary than you already have, it's a great time to be negotiating for the additional perks. Like maybe they're paying for you to go get a master's degree, or maybe they're paying for you to attend a couple conferences every year, or it's a few extra days off or whatever. It's a great time to be building those things in where you already are too. It doesn't just have to be a thing that you negotiate because you're looking to go ahead and take a competitive offer.
And to your point, it doesn't always need to be salary explicitly. It can be other things that are important to you that are built around that. Well, very good. Well, I remind people you can catch past episodes of Manage Your Damn Money as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Please leave us a 5-star rating on any of those platforms. That helps more people catch the show. Also, if you have a question you want us to answer or a topic you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And you can always catch us on Instagram and Twitter. My handle's @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/ManageYourDamnMoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manager Damn Money, where today's show, which I forgot to actually share with the folks what we're going to be talking about in the earlier segment, is debating the ethics of American philanthropy. As we approach the close of tax season, most of us can relate to the question asked by our tax preparer or tax preparation software solution. Did you give any money to charity in 2019? This question alone has defined a segment of how people give and access to certain tax breaks for generations. This is a recent article in the Washington Post magazine, which gets to the core of a question we will explore in this episode of Manager Damn Money. Are the ethics which drive our approach to charitable giving right? Is the practice of wealthy people and organizations defining the terms of the work charitable organizations do correct? Or might they require some kind of adjustment? Malcolm and I will share the article and debate the question, Malcolm. So sometimes there are stories which get to the heart of some question in the money space that was so interesting we decided to take it on as a show. And this is one of those articles, Malcolm. Did you read it?
I did, yeah.
It was a long read, but it was really good. The title reads, "The Millennials Who Want to Get Rid of Their Class Privilege." This was a March 2020 piece on the Washington Post magazine by Anna Altman. In 1998, Tracy Hewitt and Lynn Gerber, two well-to-do young Boston area women who felt alienated from the rest of the world of philanthropy because of their youth, formed a group they called Comfort Zone. They conceived of it as a place to talk about being a wealthy, privileged young person who nevertheless wanted a more equitable society. Comfort Zone changed its name to Resource Generation in 2000. Malcolm had a smirk, if you couldn't hear that come across on his face as I read that. Today, Resource Generation has 16 chapters nationwide and 14 full-time employees. Members pay annual dues that start at $250 and vary depending on their level of wealth. The group essentially asks its members to give generously to grassroots organizations that they believe will do the long-term, nitty-gritty work to meaningfully change the circumstances that lead to wealth inequality. In process, Resource Generation aims to change the conversation about how the rich got their privilege and what they do to spread their wealth, Malcolm. So this was kind of like the core area. There was some like story weaved around it, which I left out. But what was your initial reaction to the concept behind Resource Generation as a organization specifically?
The organization sounds a little bit naive, in my opinion. And we obviously will get a little bit deeper into it in the show, but just that first blush, my thought process was, you don't really have the money just yet, and you're already trying to change the way things are done. And that is going to pose some significant challenges.
Okay. I'm trying to think what I thought. I think I didn't get to thinking anything until further down in the story when I was like, oh, a few light bulbs went off for me personally. But the article goes on to say the idea, says Resource Generation Executive Director, is to do voluntary redistribution in service of involuntary redistribution. The hope, she says, is that voluntary redistribution will give more economic and political power to those who typically don't have it, low-wage workers, the formerly incarcerated, the homeless, and the poor, Malcolm. So generally speaking, the notion of wealthy folks, and we'll just say wealthy millennial folks and wealthy Gen Zers, because that's the demographic we focus on in this show, essentially giving away their inherited wealth in most cases to, better the world. What do you think about that as a concept? Because that's a totally new construct that I can't think of any existing anywhere else in a capitalist society of the United States of America.
Well, I mean, again, it's two things. One, I've heard of and seen folks who are like, I'm disgusted by the way that my family came into this money, and so I just want to give it away so that I feel better about myself as a person, and don't have the stink of, the oil baron granddaddy or, the person who profited off the Holocaust or something like that, and I just don't want that stench on me. Then you also have the people that look at the world and say, it's not fair what all is happening outside of our gated community, and so I want to go out there into the world and help do things that make a difference because you guys are missing the mark in here inside of your walled off, world. So I get it, in both of those cases. I'm just,
this feels like a very genuinely millennial thing to do.
It sounds so millennial, so millennial. And also what I'm concerned about is that mom and dad or grandma and grandpa or whoever is actually still in charge of the money.
Well, then let's define that, because in most cases, these kids or these people don't have full access to
That's
the
the
wealth.
point. They don't have, not only do they not have full access, they don't have control of the money. And so I think in a lot of cases, what wealthy people are most concerned about is no longer being wealthy. And so if my kid has just shown me that they are willing and interested in undoing that wealth that gets us access, that gets us power, I'm now a little less likely to be willing to give it to them even after death. And so I'm going back to my estate attorney and having them redraft those papers.
So let's flip it a little bit. Let's assume that that person has control of their wealth.
So they're first generation wealth creator, like?
No. Let's just assume for whatever reason that the millennial has inherited the wealth and they are in control of a significant portion of it and can do as they wish with it.
Sure.
Now, how do you feel about the phenomena of a millennial saying, get this, dirty thing away from me?
We'll see. So there's a lot. Have you heard of the Giving Pledge?
Maybe.
So the Giving Pledge is this thing among billionaires where they've signed a contract. I don't know who actually is the holder of the contract, as a matter of fact, but it's a bunch of people like Robert Smith, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, the Gates family, who have basically said, I'm going to give away at least 51% of my wealth in my lifetime.
Before it gets handed down to my heirs.
Because I don't need it. So Warren Buffett, for example, has famously said, like, if my kids can't do with 5% of what I have what they need to do, then I've done something wrong. And so he's signed away 95% of his overall net worth and plans to give it away in his lifetime. So for people like that, like, they've already made the determination that things need to happen differently in the world. But I'm personally going to shape the way that they happen by voting with my dollars, if you will. So, it's not necessarily just a millennial concept, but the folks who are saying, like, en masse, I am going to join organizations like this and do something about it with that inherited wealth, I got to see it. Frankly, like, I feel like once they get down to like 20% spent and that account balance is different from what they're used to seeing,
pull back a little bit.
They might pull back on those reins a little bit.
That's funny. All right, well, we're going to get a little bit deeper into this conversation, this topic. Definitely an esoteric topic, but one that we thought was interesting nonetheless. But before we do, I want to remind you can catch past episodes of our show as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. And please leave us a 5-star rating. Go do it right now, this moment, as you hear my voice. Right now.
Not if you're driving, though.
We don't do it if you're driving.
Thank you.
Okay, indeed. And leave us a review on any of the platforms that helps more people catch the show. If you have a question you want us to answer or a topic you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And of course, you can catch us on our often dormant social media handles. At MYDM1 is my handle. Malcolm, what's yours?
At Malcolm on Money.
And that's on Twitter and on Instagram. And of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money, where on this episode, the conversation at hand is debating the ethics of American philanthropy. The article that we're reviewing today is an article from the Washington Post magazine by Anna Altman in March 2020, and it reads the title, The Millennials Who Want to Get Rid of Their Class Privilege. And we were talking about the article on the other side, and the article continues to say, at conferences and webinars and in local working groups and through resource generation books and peer-to-peer mentorship, members learn how to shed entitled assumptions. One bedrock resource generation practice is educating members to work closely with community organizations in what it calls the quote-unquote right relationship, not dictating how donated funds should be used, but supporting local leaders who are often poor or working class and are closest to the problems that they seek to address. Philanthropy has been a controversial pursuit since at least the Gilded Age, when workers began to organize in response to the widening wealth inequality as the industrial capitalism took hold. Critics at the time argued that robber barons such as Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller were elevating their own position in society by depressing workers' incomes and using philanthropy to dictate where profits went and to which causes. Traditional philanthropy, says Ho, reinforces the idea that the wealthy know best and know best how to solve social ills, when in the reality, the wealthy elite cause a lot of the problems in the first place, or maybe the existence of them causes problems. Malcolm,
No, it's some of the people themselves.
Some of the people.
It's some of the people.
Okay, I was being nice and politically correct. Question for you though: is there an inherent conflict when it comes from wealthy people giving to like nonprofit organizations and then dictating what is done with that money to address whatever the issue is?
It's tough. That's a tough question because you're asking me at my own station in life now, where I'm so far away from being a billionaire,
Right.
that I can answer the question through this lens.
Right.
But I try to think, I'm thinking about this through the lens of, if I were to give a person who I didn't think was very responsible financially some money to help them get on their feet, I probably would want a little bit of say in how they spent that money in getting on their feet, right? And so I think about it in the same terms, like I would want to make sure that the money actually went toward the activity that I told you, we agreed was what you were going to do, because otherwise you'll be right back in the same place not too long from now, potentially asking me again to take a chance on you and put more money in your hands.
All right. I know for me, that I actually have an experience in working in nonprofits, and I know that a lot of grants and a lot of donated foundational money was tied to quote unquote specific outcomes, which sometimes were and other times weren't necessarily directly associated with whatever the organization was trying to do on a broader level. So it's definitely, this particular article had me raise my eyebrows, like, I'd never previously thought about that relationship that you have a big organization or foundation or individual saying, here's this money to address your issue, but you must do X, Y, and Z because I said so.
But again, a lot of times folks think, rightly or wrongly, because they have ascended to the level that they have financially, that they know better than most.
That don't make it
And
right.
so, well, no, I'm not defending it. Like I said, rightly or wrongly. But so the mindset is, I know better than you know what you need to do to get to where you want to get to.
Right.
And so I'm going to give you this money and also some instructions on how to use it. And that is going to be the thing to solve your problem.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get to be a billionaire just by sitting on the couch or being born to the right family. I actually pulled myself up by my bootstraps.
Those bootstraps.
And made something of myself.
Did it
That
do?
is the reason I think that you get that heavy-handedness when it comes to it.
The article continues to say, as Peter Buffett, son of Warren Buffett, wrote in a 2013 New York Times opinion piece, philanthropy has become big business. High-profile foundations and nonprofit organizations, constrained by donor desires and restrictive grant conditions, often oppose the initiatives most likely to actually mitigate inequality, such as raising taxes or lobbying for a higher minimum wage, Malcolm. And that's like, when we talk, I mean, to me, that's like, that last line is it. So my question is,
but it's two separate things too. You said minimum wage and higher taxes. Those are two completely separate things.
which would reduce income on the wealthier people's end or business owners, et cetera, on two ends. But a question for you, is there merit to the charge that the wealthy or at least the circumstances that allowed them to become wealthy, are in many cases part of the root problem of many of our social challenges?
Yes, because I, as a person who is a billionaire, this is going to be counter to what we just saw with Michael Bloomberg and whoever the other guy, somebody Steyer, was
Tom
that
Steyer,
got kicked out of the election because they didn't get enough delegates.
Yeah.
But if I have enough money, I have political influence, which means that I have power.
Right.
So me having that influence and power lends itself to a set of rules and regulations being created that allow me to amass even more of that money, to amass even more of that power, a la the Koch brothers, for example, right? Who are very generous on both sides of the political aisle, because they know with that level of influence, nobody's ever going to come for them in their chemical plants. That essentially is what has created the environment that allows folks to get wealthier and wealthier and more powerful, and then also affect a lot of negative change in a lot of cases.
Right. Another question. What can be done to address the relationship between donors and those using the donated money to address social problems? Is there even a solution for that? Because to me, it's like the organization or the people taking the money to do the work need the money to do the work. So they can't say no exactly. They don't want to say no exactly. It would almost take a more, as we were discussing earlier, millennial, I just want to help in the best way I think without attaching myself maybe to the outcome in that way. Maybe that's the attitude. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, that's tough. Because again, now I'm trusting you with my money.
Well, it's not your money. That's the whole point.
Well, you're the one running. Oh,
You're giving it away.
I see what you're saying.
You're literally giving it away to detach yourself from the money. If you adopt that, millennial attitude that was referenced earlier in the piece. So in my mind, that's the only way you get to a point where the relationship is corrected, because a person's like, I've given you the money. That was my part. Now you go to do your part.
But am I super naive in believing that once I've donated this money, that problem is going to be solved? And that person who's now in charge of solving that problem isn't just going to suddenly become wealthier themselves?
No, I mean, we're assuming everyone's playing their roles as like.
I mean, you're talking to the resident skeptic here. I have seen the salaries of some of the leaders of the nonprofits around DC. I'm not as optimistic as you are that I wouldn't just suddenly become more enriched myself. And the mission still is the mission tomorrow.
Resident skeptic strikes again. Well, the article goes on to say, in the fall of 2018, Resource Generation announced a quote-unquote giving pledge, encouraging its members to establish an annual donation goal with an eye towards redistributing all or almost all of their inherited wealth or excess income. The group's new guidelines encourage all members to increase the amount they give. The first step is to calculate how much a member is giving relative to the assets and income. To start with, the members might give away 1 to 7% of their assets annually. 7% represents an important threshold. It's the average annual return on the stock market investment. So if members give less than that, they're still making money off of their wealth, which is a big no-no, at least within this group. So Malcolm, let's assume you can.
So interesting.
Yeah, it is an interesting
concept.
Sounds
un-American almost.
You would say that. Let's assume you could get a portion of those inheriting wealth to spend down excess money in their coffers. Does this solve major issues like wealth inequality?
I don't know, man. I think the folks who are at the point that they're willing to give in this way, the 1 to 7% folks, they don't have enough of it yet for it to be a significant enough impact to really touch on the people that have the real large war chest, if you will. But I think it's safe to assume that at least some of them will become the inheritors of that wealth. And so if they're already in this mindset and have these practices happening already, maybe 20, 30 years down the road, we'll kind of turn that corner. But it's just, I mean, it's tough for me to see this proving out to be anything other than the haves get havier and the have-nots get have-nottier.
Or a different group of haviers.
Yeah, I mean, essentially that. Like, I'm now pulling up some more people by their bootstraps who are at the heads of these organizations. But they're, frankly, still considered the have-nots in comparison to the people who have these foundations named after them and buildings on college campuses named after them. Those people are still havier than anybody else. So I just don't see it as becoming a thing that really turns the tide. that way.
And there's some other considerations before we close the show. Taxes and prestige, Malcolm, you kind of alluded to it. Charitable giving comes with tax deductions that are usually only accessible, at least in a major way, to wealthy folks. So that's one element. And then philanthropy also yields social returns as donors are rewarded with their names on buildings or board rosters and the chance to rub shoulders at social events. Think high society, and they can make more potential connections with other people who might help them become more wealthy. So it begs some questions for me, Malcolm. Do the rewards for charitable giving in our tax code cause any issues for, like, you're getting a tax benefit for doing this quote unquote charitable giving? Is there any conflict there?
I guess so.
Okay.
I'll still take it. Like, so one thing that's really important is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017 changed the way that you get to deduct that.
Okay.
So because the standard deduction became double, a lot of people lost their need to itemize their taxes.
Right.
And one of the things that you itemize is
Was your
charitable
donations.
contributions.
Right.
So if you're not a person who is, I hate to use the word wealthy, I'll say well off. If you're not a person who's well off enough to be writing off above $24,000 anyway, it really took away your incentive, your dollar for dollar incentive to donate money. I would say I'd love to believe that people still continue to give in that way. And frankly, a lot of people probably did, and maybe not even realize that it happened. I have a client, for example, who kind of shamed me when I was asking them how come they didn't actually write off their charitable giving, since they do a good bit of it. And they said that it kind of diminishes it to them. Like, it makes them feel like we're just doing it to get the tax deduction. And it's not really, the spirit in which we wanted to give the gift.
I mean, that's the spirit of what this article is talking about.
And they are themselves actually millennials. They're elder statespeople, like what we're talking about, like the two of us. But that kind of shocked me a little bit. And then the capitalist in me took over and was like, I'm still going to get
like, nah, you can't do that. You got to get these taxes.
Well, no, I can't force them, right? I don't do their taxes. But me personally, I sat for a second and I was like, that's a really good point. I like to believe that the reason I give to the charities that I give to is because I really support the mission. But I also support my own mission, which is to pay the IRS as little as possible when it comes time to file those taxes. So one hand can wash the other.
That's hilarious. That's such a Malcolm thing to say. Well, for me, it brought up one thing in particular. Like, there was an organization that I obviously won't name that I worked for that had a relationship with a specific donor. And that donor basically paid for the entire organization and had some goals which were controversial. And so it was almost like the foundation was driving what the nonprofit was doing on like a grassroots level. And it's one of those things where it was like, it felt a little dirty even as I was like in it. Because it was like, this doesn't feel like it doesn't feel thoroughly like the true, grassroots relationship is supposed to be.
Is this because they were like out there buying tiki torches for Unite the Right rallies or something? Like, what do you mean?
It wasn't that bad. It was just more like there is something about this relationship that is convenient rather than it being truly about what the organization was supposed to be about.
I see. Well, I mean, wealthier people live a life of convenience, so.
Indeed. So my final question before we close this show, do you think millennials and Gen Zers with these kinds of relationships with their inherited wealth will create a trend? Like you just mentioned it kind of popping forth. Is this going to continue to be a thing where wealthy millennials and even, well-to-do and even those in middle class say, you know what, maybe we don't quite have it right in terms of the relationship with donors? And
I think yes. I think we as a generation tend to care a little bit more about the world around us than the few living generations prior to us. But I also have to remember that you still have the folks in our generation who attended the Fire Festival, for example, right? So those millennials who belong to well-off families who spent $5,000 to go to a music festival that didn't even exist because they had the money to do so. So there's still going to be those people out there, but I think you do probably have quite a few more of us who have the ability to vote with our dollars, so to speak, that are making at least some small impact in that way. That wasn't happening before.
I think the trend will continue to evolve. I'm not sure exactly how, but there's definitely a conversation in our generation and the one below us in terms of how wealth distribution in America and across the world has a longer term impact. And so there might be some conversations there. And we thought that this article kind of perfectly encapsulated it. I want to remind you can catch Manage Your Damn Money as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Please leave us a review on any of those platforms. That helps more people catch the show. If you have a question or a topic you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. You can always catch us on social media. My handle's @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
@Malcolm on Money.
And that's on Instagram and Twitter. And you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. Thanks once again to our partners here at Montgomery Community Media for their amazing hospitality. And until next time, be good with your money.
Peace.
Peace.